Pat Burt is the former mayor and current council member of the city of Palo Alto. He's the VTA Valley Transit Board Chair representing Palo Alto, and a Caltrain board member also obviously representing Palo Alto. So he is a triple threat guest that we have. And he's going to talk about some issues with sustainable housing and transportation, and to explain what a TOC is and all kinds of good stuff. So first time I said this afternoon, without further ado, Pat Burt.
Very good. So thanks for having me. Is my volume okay?
You're good.
All right. So I really want to talk about sustainable housing and transportation, both from a city standpoint and then on the transportation side regionally. So just to give you a point of reference from Palo Alto as a city, we have very aggressive climate goals. We adopted in 2016 a goal of 80% reduction in our greenhouse gases by 2030, which is significantly more aggressive than what the state adopted just recently. Now, the backbone for doing that is really a series of steps that we've done over 20 years from our first climate plan. We had early renewables built on that with our REACH code. And then really in 2016, we adopted this goal. And that was at the same year that we completed transitioning to 100% carbon neutral electricity. So that became the foundation and the building block to be able to essentially focus on electrifying all remaining, 80% reduction in remaining transportation and building GHGs. So in this graph, over on the left side is where the makeup of where we were in our GHGs back in 1990. 2020 is over on the right, and the key things are that the two shades of blue are natural gas, principally for buildings, and the orange and the red are transportation. So those are the remaining big areas to tackle. And what we've done to first on the building side is we've adopted some of the state leading REACH codes, and we've had two different REACH codes in recent years. The most recent one has built us up to this level. So all new homes and most commercial construction now has to go in all electric, and all new units have to be EV charger ready, with a right size charging, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes. When we have even major remodels, it triggers a mandatory conversion for heat pump hot water heaters. And then we have a strong waste diversion program, and we adopted a low carbon concrete policy based on Marin County's leading policy in that. So that's all the new buildings. And we talk a lot about just the great opportunity there is for new buildings to have very low or zero emissions. And that's really true. But the big challenge that we face is that for 2045, where the state is attempting to get to carbon neutrality, 85% of those buildings that will be in existence in that year are estimated to have already been built. They exist today. And so 85% of our building decarbonization challenge is focused on retrofitting existing buildings. And as we as a city have moved aggressively, really last 3 years, moving from in our building electrification from a series of pilots to really start understanding what it would take and what might be the different programs to a full-scale aggressive program, we've learned a number of things. First, 2 years ago, the operations side of our electric utility, and I should have mentioned that Palo Alto owns all of its own utilities: electric, gas, water, wastewater, even fiber. And so we really have two halves to that electric utility department: the folks who do all the renewable purchases and innovation programs like we're talking about here, and then the folks who have to keep the lights on, the operations side. And so 2 years ago, as we were beginning to ramp up our electrification of buildings and trying to move first single-family homes as our greatest focus, because it's frankly the easiest to do, and then multifamily and commercial. We had the utilities operations side said, time out, you need to halt this. We cannot keep up with all the triggering of transformer upgrades that are resulting from the electrification of homes. And we went back and we looked at this and said, that doesn't make sense, that you're going to need a 10-year program to upgrade this. And frankly, we don't understand why you're seeing those already, so many transformer upgrades, because we haven't electrified that many homes yet. And the short answer was that it really wasn't electrification of homes that was triggering it. It was the very high EV adoption rate that we have in Palo Alto. We've had the highest in the country for really for a decade. And it was essentially oversized home chargers that were being put in, 50 and 60 amp, what are called level 2 or 240 volt chargers, so that you could recharge your Tesla at home in 3 hours. That put a strain on the grid, and nobody really needs to typically recharge their EV that rapidly. So we've done a number of adjustments to be able to kick off our home electrification program without taxing the grid too aggressively, and we've ramped up this whole investment in our local grid reliability and capacity. And so those two things are now going in parallel. The first big kickoff is, we call it a B-Smart program. It's a program that essentially the framework was developed by Carbon Free Palo Alto, one of our local nonprofit groups that has been driving the city toward decarbonization. And it's really a uniquely innovative program. It's a turnkey process for replacing heat pump water heaters. And we do it upon end of life. And the term end of life is different from burnout. Burnout means when your hot water heater conks out and you have cold water coming out of the shower, and you've got to get a solution right away. And the needs to be able to identify what heat pump hot water heater you might need, order it, get a contractor, get the permitting, pull power perhaps from your panel because you're going from gas to electric. All those things take quite a while, many weeks, and people will not go without water during that period of time. So instead, we have this end of life program. And hot water heaters typically last 10 to 12 years, maybe 15 at the outside. And so what we're doing is identifying all the folks who have a hot water heater that is over 10 years old. And we approach them with two alternative programs, one that allows them to just kind of hire their own contractor and take all of the incentives that are offered financially. But the other is the turnkey program, where we bring in a consultant that looks at their particular circumstance and provides options on the best alternative, streamlined purchasing. Then it goes to a single contractor, and then on-bill financing. And what that means is the city will finance the difference in cost between a gas hot water heater and a heat pump. And that's usually several $1,000s. But the savings that the homeowner gets or the resident gets from energy efficiency of the heat pump saves them about $20 a month. And that savings gets applied to paying back the loan on the difference between the gas and the electric costs. And so it takes about 5 to 7 years for the city to get repaid the upfront amount that they have, but it's a really effective, innovative program. So we've really learned a lot the last 3 years in home electrification. Costs are falling on the technologies rapidly. Sean just showed us just keeping up with the innovations is a task in itself, which is really exciting. They just keep getting better and better almost monthly. We realize that, as I mentioned on the EV charging, but also appliances, is to right size and to have what might be called a lower watt home. We in the US tend to have big appliances, and they've been kind of dumb appliances. And in reality, smart systems that are right sized and not oversized are really the future. And so that goes from smart vehicles that allow bidirectional charging to smart breakers and panels. The devices themselves these days are beginning to have smart technology, and then the grid and even transformers need to have these changes. But Sean mentioned one really great value to the heat pump space heating and cooling, which is it's really more comfortable. They have inverters, and they're not blasting all on and off. But there's also a really tremendous public health value that many of you have already heard about in recent times, but it is a drastic public health risk for children from exposure to burnt methane, primarily from cooking stoves. And when parents hear this, they're often angry that they really didn't know this impact on their kids. And because we hear from people that their gas stoves, the last gas thing that they would ever want to give up. Well, first, today's induction cooktops are really fantastic from a quality and a safety standpoint, but even more so from this benefit from public health. Oh, and I will note that if you see on the side, even in the hot water heaters, we now have 2 brands that each have a series of 120 volt hot water heaters. And so if those are right for a given household's use case, that's a plug-in into a typically 20 amp outlet. And so there's not hard wiring and not additional drain. So then the other half of our efforts, and this is what intersects then with the regional transportation issues, is how do we get that even larger share of our remaining greenhouse gases that are from transportation, about 60% of our remaining GHGs. And that comes from a variety of approaches. First, we've been able to learn a lot because we've been this exceptionally high EV adoption rate, which is now, the county has gone up to 42 or 43% this last year. That includes plug-in hybrids and battery electric, but that's phenomenal. That's a big jump in the last couple of years. So I already mentioned this need to have right-size charging. What's really become more apparent in the whole EV charging field is that there are a range of charging rates that need to be offered to the public, and how fast and powerful the chargers are. And then we need to have charging really available everywhere people are going to need for the number of EVs that we're going to have in 2030 and beyond. We like other cities have said, oh yeah, we're farther ahead of installing chargers than other cities, but what we are now doing is looking at a strategic plan that says, yes, but by 2030, if we get up to 80% of our trips from EVs, then what level of charging, how many chargers do we need? Where do we need them? In particular, that we're all now understanding that the future is going to be the lowest cost and the greenest energy is being produced during the day, when solar and wind are frankly already some days overproducing more than the grid can handle. And that's when we want to charge our EVs. So instead of us thinking, well, the convenience is I'll always charge at home, to tap into that daytime charging, we also need to have more access of charging during the day for workers and otherwise. So then we've had this great challenge of charging in multifamily homes because it's the landlord who needs to do the investment and the tenant who gets the benefit. But we're really seeing a transformation in that already, that the rental market is now, the last year or two, investors in rental housing are very deliberately expanding their EV charging systems because renters are demanding it in our region. And it's a competitive advantage. And so part of what we thought we were going to really have to push multifamily landlords, because they don't have that direct financial incentive. The market is really helping us in that way. And there are some new technologies coming forward that, like a new company locally, Go Power EV, that has kind of cracked the nut on how to do low cost, scalable multifamily unit charging. And so those technologies are advancing quickly, often with smart systems, and it's looking very promising. Basically, the difficulty and the costs we are seeing in multifamily charging today versus 2 and 3 years ago is a great improvement, and it looks real promising. The other backbones of our local transit system is getting transit passes in the hands of especially lower income workers. And so we have a whole series of programs. Caltrain is going to be coming out with a kind of a template or for cities to use up and down the Caltrain corridor of all the tools to be able to drive purchases of Caltrain passes for workers in the community and low-income residents. And with the changes that have happened in the last couple of years, as folks probably know, BART and Caltrain ridership remains quite low. We no longer have a problem of people with discounted passes competing for space on a train with people who are paying full fares. So the agencies are just beginning a transformation toward really thinking that transit passes not only get people using transit more, but that they won't harm the agency's revenue models and how much compensation they get from riders. So that's a big breakthrough. And then, of course, the changes in active transportation of bike riding and micromobility. And then we have exciting developments on electrified transit. Caltrain remains on schedule for fully electrified trains from San Jose to San Francisco by October, and a new service schedule. So they'll be electrified, they'll be faster, and we will have better service, especially at the smaller stations and throughout the day from 5 in the morning till 1 at night. And that's really going to make Caltrain just a much more valuable system that's the backbone of our transit approaches. So on the regional side, there are a lot of things changing. And a problem is that we have changes not only in advancements in technology and investments in the new systems, but we have costs that are changing as well, and I'll go into that in just a moment. But I even we have in there the electrified Caltrain on the left, the new BART to San Jose on the right that we'll talk about. Stanford's Marguerite system is a great innovator in a fully electrified fleet that is a model for big public agencies, but they're a very sizable transit system that is open to the public to ride. It's not widely enough appreciated that. Then I even have this electric plane on the bottom, which is not just Jetsons pie in the sky stuff. We have Palo Alto owns its own municipal airport that we took over from the county a number of years ago. We've had a plan to really green the airport, and there is a consortium of companies involved in zero emission aviation who have targeted our airport for a variety of reasons as a pilot for a full adoption of that. And we're excited about that. That's going to take a number of years, but we're just starting to do the planning on that. So then on the regional transit, here are some of the real challenges. Our costs have been soaring, as you've maybe seen in the papers. The tunnel in San Francisco from the end of the current Caltrain line to their DTX terminal just went up again. And on the VTA side, our costs for tunneling from the Berryessa BART station to downtown San Jose have gone up and up. We just had an increase of $2.5 billion. We think if that's as much as it goes up, we have a way to close that funding gap, but it is a serious matter. And it's being driven by really a national challenge on materials and labor, and now borrowing costs, because agencies will borrow to bond fund a portion of what they're doing. We have almost 50% of the costs that are going to be covered by the federal government, and the balance by the state, and the big measures A and B that Santa Clara County voters have voted in recent years. But the one issue that we perhaps can address is the shortage of skilled labor for these civil engineering jobs. Same thing on electrification, and the same thing on housing. We need a very ramped up state-led program to expand the labor pool in this skilled workforce, highly paying jobs for people who can have great opportunities in our region, who are not going to college, but have compensation that is often every bit as good as what comes with a 4-year degree. It's a great opportunity and a great crisis right now if we don't get that investment ramped up. The other big change that is happening in transit is that we have had 3 major changes in the last few years, really since COVID. First, hybrid work. We all know that. It may stabilize or transition back to modestly more at the office than we are today, but no one seems to think that it's going to return to the normal pre-COVID 5-day-a-week schedule. And that's cutting into the ridership of BART and Caltrain. Caltrain in particular was very heavily riders who were higher income commuters. But with, as I mentioned, with this coverage in our new service model, we're going to be able to provide ridership for folks who are on different hours, service workers and people who are using discretionary travel. And so we're going to be able to counter some of that. But also the regional transportation growth or transit growth in ridership was being driven for a long while by population growth, and the capacity that we were building has been driven by anticipated population growth. As you can see in this graph, oops, back on the lower right, Caltrain's who is responsible for projecting the needs in transportation for the state, has gone from predicting that we would go from 39 million people in 2020 to almost 53 million. And now we predict that we are not going to have population growth for the next 4 decades. And that's really primarily because of lower birth rates, less so immigration and emigration. Either way, it means that we need to rethink as agencies, how do we thrive in an era where we're not having this tailwind of the ever-increasing traffic congestion and more people who are going to be needing to get about. So how do we do that? First, on the meeting the infrastructure needs, we have too little capacity in our transit today. We have gaps that we have to fill, completing the electrification of Caltrain, grade separations in many areas of Caltrain, Burt to San Jose, and other needs. Those remain very important because we had a deficit. But going forward, we probably are not going to need to increase the capacity in the state as much as we previously thought. And it may sound odd coming from someone who's a transit advocate, but that's the reality of what we're facing. And the agencies, because ridership is down, are probably going to need more subsidies, fewer state and federal dollars going forward for the capital costs, and more to subsidize the systems. But the cities can also play a really great role through a whole bunch of development agreements and transportation management associations, transit-oriented communities and development that have by default transit passes supplied to all those new residents. All those things can drastically drive up transit use. If you have a pass, you will use transit much more often. And then lastly, there's some really exciting technologies. These are actual 21st century technologies that are moving it forward rapidly because they've been based upon building blocks that have been developed in recent years or recent decades. Cloud computing, the Internet of Things, advanced propulsion technologies, advanced energy storage. And they have the potential to make transit faster and more convenient and cheaper than driving a car. And if we get to that point in the next few years, then transit really becomes the preferred alternative in many occasions. So all that adds up to why do we do these things locally as cities, and how can we work together amongst each other and regionally? And frankly, the power of collaboration in addressing climate and social issues is just orders of magnitude greater than what we can do as individual cities. So thank you very much for inviting me today. And don't know if we have any time. If you have any questions, Dennis?
Yeah, well, we'll do a lightning round. Actually, it's not a question anymore. I had one about, I looked at the garage in the background of that EV and said, that looks familiar. And sure enough, it was the HP garage on Addison.
Yeah, well, that was my photoshopping. I'm surprised it wasn't so obvious because it tested my skill set.
There you go. Look good. Actually, a question, this is more on the Palo Alto programs about it. Well, is there a program for restaurants, and education? Now, specifically, I think this was involving electrification. And obviously there was the continuing kind of issue with the development of that one restaurant in Stanford Shopping Center with
Yeah. So we have not ramped up that. We've identified it as a need. But one of the things that we've recognized is that At this point in time, what's most important is we get 80, 90% of the way down the field. That last 5 or 10% we can deal with in a few years. And in the case of, for instance, a restaurant that perceives that they need gas for cooking, we may not fall on that sword right now, and instead look at all the other uses of gas and reduce it drastically. As we reduce gas use, the cost of the gas per therm will go up because fewer users will be supporting the same infrastructure. And so the economics will favor electrification more. The education of the public and appreciation of how good induction cooking is, including for commercial kitchens, and how much healthier it is, both the heat generated in the kitchen. Some of those kitchens are miserable places to work, and they're very unhealthy. And there needs to be that transformation in that education. Lastly, as an interim measure, propane, which is actually where much of this gas heating was developed and where it exists in other countries, is about half the GHG production as methane. So they could shut off the gas, still do, if they want to hang on for a while in gas heating, they don't need the methane, they can replace it with propane, and we can still cut the gas line.
This is the last of the lightning round. Thoughts, and now you can answer this as a private citizen or whatever you want to do, but any thoughts on high-speed rail given the lower ridership projections?
Yeah, it's a longer topic, but when we as voters supported high-speed rail, there were two primary value propositions. One was that because of population growth, we'd need the equivalent of 8 more lanes of freeway on Highway 5 or something to that effect. And second, that it was going to replace all these internal combustion engines with electrified system. By the time, if high-speed rail ever gets connected to the two endpoints in San Jose and San Francisco and LA, the state will be far along in its transformation to electrification to vehicles, and be starting to even on the air travel. So those two value propositions, that the population growth isn't happening and the other transformation is happening faster in high-speed rail. Then the problem on funding, every year since we passed this measure in 2008, we've spent $1 to $2 billion on average, and the estimated cost has gone up $5 to $10 billion. So the cost, the more we spend, it's the cost gap or the funding gap has grown drastically. And the projected completion for every year we spend $1 to $2 billion, it's gone out 1 to 2 years. So it doesn't look promising. And I'm hopeful that we'll have better technologies. That SkyTran technology is about 10% the cost of high-speed rail.
Well, we'll have to have you back for more of this because there's a few other inquiries that could go on for quite a while, but we really should keep with schedule. Certainly appreciate your coming on and covering a wide range of issues.
Well, thanks for having me, and thanks for doing this event.
Okay, we're going to move over to Karen Chappell.